Agility provides you greater visibility much earlier in the process so that you can make the appropriate decisions. Decisions are required much faster today than they ever were. Today, in a world of export controls, climate volatility, and industrial policy shifts, agility now is the competitive advantage.
In today's episode of the Resilient Supply Chain podcast, I'm joined by Abe Eshkenazi, CEO of ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. Abe has seen supply chain move from a quiet back office function to a boardroom priority, and in this conversation we unpack what that shift really means now that export controls, climate volatility, tariffs, cybersecurity, geopolitics, and industrial policy are all colliding at once. The big takeaway is this. Resilient supply chains are no longer just about recovering from shocks. They're about seeing earlier, deciding faster, and building optionality before disruption becomes expensive. And one of the most telling moments in the conversation is Abe's point that after the pandemic, half of companies wanted to get back to where they were, while the other half accepted they were never going back. That split says a lot about who's prepared for the next decade. Let's get into it. Abe, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Pleasure to join you. I'm currently with ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. I'm sure most individuals have a keen understanding of supply chain. We help organizations and individuals not only respond to the demand signals and the supply challenges that we have, but ensure that patients and consumers get what they want when they want it at a price that is convenient for them. Everything is supply chain today, so let's dig into it.
Yeah, okay. And you're being a little modest when you say you're with ASCM. Tell us your title and how long you've been there and what your role is. Come on.
Currently the CEO for ASCM. If we talk about supply chain years, it feels like I've been here 100 years. I joined the organization well before supply chain was really understood in the marketplace. That was back in 2006. We've gone through so many transformations. It's hard to think that the same company that I joined back 20 years ago is the same company that we're looking at today. So much has changed, Tom, not only in the recognition of supply chain, but the impact that it has on our communities, that it has on our economies, has on our environment. Today, supply chain is ubiquitous. It impacts everybody from kitchen tables to boardroom tables.
And when you were a little kid in school, did you always want to get into supply chain?
I don't think most people had an idea, especially when I grew up, that supply chain was even a thing that you could go into. No, mine was more on finance and consulting. That's my background, having been a CPA, but a recovering CPA. They tend to tell history. I wanted to focus more on making history. And I think that's what really separates supply chain. And a lot of the things that supply chain professionals do is responding to the challenges and not only informing their own organization on how to do it more efficiently, but to ensure that we're doing it sustainably and in a way that ensures that we have a future to look forward to that doesn't destroy the planet and that we have sustainable resources for the future.
And you've led ASCM through major expansion and industry shifts. What's changed most in supply chain leadership expectations over the last, let's say, 5 years?
It's really interesting because I think it's the recognition of the supply chain professional as a strategic leader as opposed to a transactional focus for most organizations. We've seen the rise of the supply chain professional. Now CSCOs, chief supply chain officers, are almost embedded in almost every organization. 10 years ago, that was not the case. More often than not, they were that quiet activity behind the scenes, making sure that everything was running right. Today, they're sitting at the boardroom table. They're sitting in front of investors. They're sitting in front of politicians. And we're seeing that the elevation of supply chain has really provided a recognition for the contribution that these individuals make. Further, we're seeing a transformation of the focus of supply chain from the transactional speed and cost to a much more sustainable, resilient, agile supply chain. But the skills necessary today have transformed supply chain and the individuals coming into supply chain today. The AI, automation, cybersecurity, sustainability, these are all now hallmarks of sustainable supply chains and resilient supply chains. So the talent side coming in today, they understand supply chain. They may not understand the complexity but they understand the need and the criticality of supply chain for organizations. We've attempted to mirror that as an organization. Our focus was on the individual competency, capability, recognition, reward. It's transformed into not only the individual, but the impact that the individual has on their company. So we thought our holy grail was, Tom, that if we can get everybody certified and competent and capable, that we've done our job. And then we realized, wait a second, if they don't contribute to organizational performance and success and sustainability, what have we done? So our merger with Supply Chain Council and bringing on a SCORE framework enabled us to not only represent the individual, but the organization and the performance, the triple bottom line. And we thought that was the end of our journey, Tom. We can train everybody. We can ensure that they're contributing to organizational performance, ensuring that they have career opportunities. We thought that was the end of our journey. And then we realized we had one more step. And that's the impact that supply chain has on our economy, it has on our ecology, it has on our consumers, it has on almost every aspect of our lives. And we've embraced that responsibility as an organization, that the focus of supply chain is not only on the individuals and the organizations, but on the consumers and the impact that they have on supply chain as well.
Mm, indeed. And what would you say, what problem are supply chain leaders still underestimating today?
I'm not sure if they're underestimating it. I think it's the complexity that the disruption that we're facing today. It's at an unprecedented level. We've dealt with shocks to our system before, Tom. You and I had been around long enough to remember the ash cloud and various disruptions, and we've responded from those and we recovered from those. What we're seeing now is just the compounding of one disruption on top of another disruption. And it really did start with the pandemic, and it's gone now in terms of wars. It's gone in terms of scarcity of critical minerals. It's now we're seeing reshoring and nearshoring as critical aspects of the organization. And we're seeing cross-functional war rooms right now, CSCOs, CSCOs, chief supply chain and sustainability officers, chief compliance officers are now working and they need to work together. Finance, legal, ops, they need to align their activities because the disruptions that we're facing right now are not single. They're not just logistics. It's not just a cost element. We're seeing it impact on from port congestions to energy reliability and carbon footprints. All of it now is embedded within supply chain, and the criticality of these or the opportunity to improve an organization through collaboration is never greater than it has been today. But as you and I have seen, the disruptions today, they are causing significant challenges for organizations, not only in their planning horizons, but in terms of their optionality for their organization.
Yeah, and volatility, as we're seeing now, is not temporary, it's almost structural. And that changes how we think about sourcing, for example. So if volatility is policy driven now, how do export controls and industrial policy change sourcing decisions at a strategic level?
Yeah, really interesting because sourcing right now isn't just about finding that right partner and committing long-term contracts. We're seeing a very different environment right now. It's about designing optionality into the system from day one, multi-tier supplier visibility. And this is one of the challenges that we had. And it exposed it during the pandemic. We did not have visibility into our extended supply chain, Tom. But more often than not, we knew who our tier one suppliers were, but as the further the supply chain moved down the road, the less visibility that we had. Now you need to ensure there's no supply chain professional that can walk into the C-suite and say, I don't know who or what is in my supply chain. So that's the good news. The bad news now, or the challenging news now, is that you now know who and what is in your supply chain, and now you need to make significant decisions about should they be in your supply chain. Further, we're seeing scenario-based planning right now. This is not just a one-off activity. It is almost a daily activity in terms of how the environment has changed from policy to environmental to financial signals. Organizations are now challenged to not only develop scenarios, but scenarios for your scenarios, especially given the changes that we're seeing today. Further, flexible contracts, cross-functional activities. We're looking for organizations that see agility as a strategic opportunity as opposed to a challenge or a disruption for their organizations. And so today, agile supply chains, its ability to reconfigure their suppliers as well as their flows without disrupting and more often in advance of the impact that it has. Whereas resiliency, you've already achieved or you've already realized and been impacted by whatever challenge there is. And now, how quickly can you respond? The agility part is identifying those issues in advance and then mitigating those prior to the impact that it has on the organization. And this is where we're seeing organizations really lean into technology, AI, automation. They're providing the necessary tools. But one of the challenges that we're seeing, Tom, is the investment in technology is not being matched with the investment in talent. And so we've got these significantly powerful technology systems without individuals having the critical thinking or problem solving skills to understand the data coming in or coming out. We need to ensure that we have capable, competent individuals that can leverage the technology investment that organizations are making.
Sure, sure. Uh, Just on the suppliers, is there a threshold where diversification of suppliers costs more than it protects?
Yeah, that's a really good question because historically we've designed for speed and cost. Those were hallmarks of supply chains. How quickly can you get it and how cheaply can you get it? Now you need to factor in the agility part, multi-tier suppliers. You need to do your pre-qualified suppliers in case of. And so the tension right now between finance and supply chain is where we're seeing a lot of the impact of the current disruptions on agility. The CFO is going to push for short-term cash flow and lower inventory costs, whereas our supply chain guys are looking for much, and women are looking for much more capabilities in terms of their inventories and flexibility and longer-term capabilities to respond. And so we're seeing some strategic tension within organizations right now, specifically because of the relationship between what the CFO's objectives are and the chief supply chain officer's objectives are right now. And again, we just did a study, interestingly, with the Institute of Management Accountants. And some of the findings indicate that while we're aligned in the short term, we're much more unaligned or misaligned in the long term in terms of strategies right now, which isn't surprising given the focus of the CFO versus the CSCO in an organization.
Mhm. And in that scenario, what about the chief sustainability officer? Because, I mean, if you're going for things like regionalization, are there scenarios where that increases emissions, for example? Should leaders think about resilience versus decarbonization trade offs?
Interesting point because unfortunately, sustainability has taken a little bit of a backseat over the past few months or year in terms of the impact that it has on organizations. The focus for most of the organizations right now is on compliance. We've had opportunities to develop what would be those strategic metrics or those key performance indicators on sustainability and our ability to provide what the consumers and the patients need without disrupting our planet. Unfortunately, we've sort of missed the mark on this, Tom. We had an opportunity as either industries or as associations to start to develop some of those metrics. Right now, most of it is compliance, it is policy or
Mhm.
regulatory. And more often than not, what we've seen in the past is compliance tends to be minimum checklists. And that's what we're seeing a little bit right now. I don't think organizations are pulling back on their sustainability objectives. It's just not as forward or as front as we're seeing it in the past.
Mm. It's dropped down the priority list.
Yeah.
Great. And if we think about sourcing, what changes inside a company when sourcing becomes dynamic or agile?
First, I think we're seeing the digital platforms that organizations are investing in. So, a much greater reliance on the technology. But the increased reliance on AI and decision making is really transforming organizations in terms of the demand forecasting, optimizing inventory, and doing the things necessary for overall operational efficiency for organizations. What we're challenged with, though, is that this is an iterative process. It's not a static environment today. And so it is data driven, it's cross functional. In some respects, the chief sustainability officer used to be like the chief supply chain officer 10 to 15 years ago, Tom, when you couldn't find them. Now we're seeing a little bit more investment in chief sustainability officers and organizations to work with your chief supply chain officer and your chief compliance officer. But I think we're seeing much more focus on the CFO and the CSCO right now. Sustainability, as you and I just discussed, has taken a little bit of a back seat in terms of where the disruptions are, the focus of the disruptions are right now. Most of it is on financial signals, supplier risk, sovereign supply chains. We're seeing disruption in terms of what is in our national interest versus what is in our national security for other organizations or other countries. And that is having an impact not only on the decision criteria, but on planning. And I think this is where we're seeing the greatest impact for organizations right now is their planning horizons have shrunk. And sustainability is not a short-term planning horizon, it's a long-term planning horizon. It's extremely difficult in today's environment to plan where if your plans were 12 to 18 months before, they shrunk considerably because of tariffs, because of the geopolitical environment that we're facing, because of the financial signals, instability for certain countries. But when you take a look at in terms of the capability of organizations or countries to identify what is in our national interest and our national security, we start to see it break down a little bit of the global nature of supply chain. It now becomes much more regionalized. It becomes much more friend-shoring. We're looking for ways to mitigate the disruption in the future. And organizations right now are starting to focus in on the short term, not knowing what their long-term impact or the environment is going to look like. Let's take an example today. If you want to develop a manufacturing facility that costs $2 to $3 billion, it's a hard ask for a CEO or CFO to go into the boardroom and say, you know what, it's going to be $2 to $3 billion. It's going to take 2 to 3 years to get online. I don't know what my sourcing strategy is going to be. I don't know what my pricing strategy is going to be or my sustainability footprint, but let's invest it on the if come. It's a hard argument to make right now for a lot of organizations without clear indications of what tariff policy is going to be, what environmental policy is going to be. Some consistency would go a long way in identifying those critical decision points for organizations so that they can invest appropriately.
Hmm. And previously we've talked about this, Abe, that the prioritization of sustainability in organizations helps bring down the costs of recruitment and retention for organizations and helps bring down the cost of customer acquisition and retention for organizations. The fact that it's now being, I don't want to say deprioritized, but as I said earlier, kind of dropping down the list of priorities, is that having any noticeable impact on the likes of recruitment and retention or customer acquisition?
It's interesting. We just did a study with Gartner on sustainability and the imperative of sustainability within an organization. And we found that when it is embedded in the priorities of the organization, it's not an and, it's part of every strategic priority that you have in the organization. And more importantly, when it's controlled or driven by the supply chain function in an organization, we tend to see much more impact, not only on employee retention, but on impact on meeting your objectives for the organization. All right, so what does that tell us? First, supply chain professionals are doers. When you give them a task, they get it done. Secondly, it's embedded in the priorities of the organization. So it's coming from the strategic imperative of an organization. It's not coming from the bottom up. It is coming from the board. It is coming from the leadership of the organization that we have to ensure that sustainability is embedded in our metrics and in our operations. Then it's drilled down and then it's carried through the supply chain. And this is where we found a much more stickiness for organizations when it is embedded and it is mandated through the supply chain function. Again, we tend to see much more alignment when it is aligned with their strategic priorities as opposed to this is something that you need to do in addition to your primary responsibilities. And so first, embedding sustainability imperatives within an individual's priorities, I think goes a long way in ensuring that you do have follow through. And then secondly, reporting on it. And I think this is where we've seen a little bit of a pullback on the reporting on sustainability initiatives. Again, I don't think companies are pulling back. It's just not being as reported as publicly as we had seen in the past.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Coming back, Abe, to the topic of agility, where are you seeing or are you seeing agile sourcing materially reducing downtime?
I think you're seeing there's a number of ways that organizations are doing it. I mean, we've seen Amazon and Procter and Gamble in terms of using AI to predict inventory needs and optimize their supply chains. But you need to start to integrate AI and the visibility that we talked about before with traceability and real-time insights for organizations for decision making. That's what really enables organizations to leverage the technology and the investment that they're making right now. But we've seen a focus on agile sourcing, on reconfiguring their suppliers, on flexible contracts, especially on the tariffs. We've seen that tariff escalators within contracts right now, that if tariffs change, we have the responsibility and the opportunity to renegotiate.
Mm.
Before it was fixed contract costs, and that's what led us. We know what our pricing is going to be. Now we don't know, or it's changing, and the uncertainty today is causing a lot of that challenge for organizations. Further, agility is a repeatable model. It's not a one off response. It's something that you do almost every day. It is data driven, it is cross functional, as you and I talked about, in terms of getting your sustainability officer, your CFO, your chief compliance officer. And I think that's one of the areas that we probably need to pay a little bit more attention to is the compliance and cybersecurity, Tom. But we talked
Yep.
before about the visibility that we did not have in terms of our extended supply chains. Well, organizations have fixed that problem by connecting everybody in our supply chain. So
Mhm.
we're now digitally connected. Your small and medium sized suppliers generally don't have the same security protocols or the same resources that the large tier one suppliers do. And more often than not, when we're seeing cybersecurity and ransomware attacks, it is coming through your extended supply chain. And so while we've embedded technology throughout supply chain, we've now increased our risk profile because of the technology footprint that we have right now. You can't do it without it, but you need to ensure that you have the appropriate protocols throughout your extended supply chain. More often than not, it is a function of working within the priorities or the leaders of your organization. It's strategic. It is not opportunistic. Agility is something that differentiates company. Interesting point. The pandemic, when it first hit us back in 20, we did a research study with the economists on agility and resiliency. And there was a fundamental question. Do you want to go back to where you were prior to the pandemic, or do you believe that you are never going back? And it was even 50-50 split, Tom. 50% said, get me back to where I was. 50% said, we're never going back. We are going to fundamentally change how we operate as an organization. And that, I think, is a clear indication of where leadership steps in an organization and ensuring that you do have the ability to respond to the challenges. I think those organizations that said, get me back to where I was, are probably wishing that they had more focus on get me to the new operating model and where we can respond appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And what skills would you say matter most in a world of like policy driven volatility?
I think there's a number of challenges that we've seen right now with the talent side, and it's interesting. It's almost generational, Tom. But yours and my generation, we did not grow up in a technology environment. It was thrust upon us. Some of us embraced it. Some of us continue to push back and use the Excel spreadsheets that are still in our core resources. I think we're looking at a very different environment where the individuals coming into the workforce right now are digital natives. They are more than comfortable with the technology that is provided for them. And more often than not, they will trust the technology blindly. And I think that's a challenge that we have right now in terms of the capability of individuals to critically think and evaluate or problem solve the information prior to accepting the data coming in. So, first, I think we have a mentoring opportunity for individuals coming into the workforce on real world experience, on problem solving, on critical thinking. I also think we have a reverse mentoring opportunity for those individuals coming in for you and I to trust the technology, to rely on more on that integrated technology. And so I think as we evaluate the talent side, there's an opportunity for us gray hairs to learn a little bit more on how to leverage technology and some of the digital natives that are coming in to understand the experience and the heuristics and the problem solving that individuals have. And they can blend those two together. That's a winning formula.
Sure. And should the likes of AI simulation literacy be baseline for sourcing leaders?
I would say that if you're not using AI right now, you're probably significantly behind the curve. Most organizations are increasing their reliance on AI decision just from the data side itself, the volume of data that is available to us right now, and optimizing that information so that you can have relevant, timely, accurate information, I think is key for a lot of organizations. The investment in technology right now is dwarfing almost any other investment in the supply chain right now, but it's the integration of the digital platforms. It's not just the investment. So you're looking at AI, you're taking a look at automation, cybersecurity, robotics, sustainability, matched with talent that can understand those technology platforms. and putting them together. And I think that's a winning formula for a lot of organizations is that agility and that using AI to not only move away from that we're in a crisis mode into operational activity, irrespective of the impact on either environmental or existential or any disruption. I think we're seeing that technology with a talent pool that can critically evaluate the issues. I think it's much more responsive to and much more resilient to the challenges that all of us are facing or that companies are facing almost on a daily basis today.
Mm. And what do you think resilient supply chains of 2030 will look like?
That's a really interesting question to take a look 4 to 5 years in advance. If you had asked me 5 years ago, would we be in this environment today? I'm not sure that I'd have a pretty good indicator of what that is. I think as much as we focused on the past generation on speed and cost, I think the focus right now is on beyond just the efficiency aspect of supply chains. I'm seeing a much more focus on long-term sustainability. And I'm hopeful that when we get to 2030, that our focus is on the long term, that we have much more certainty about our pricing and about our sourcing and about our partners in the marketplace. Right now, global supply chains are under a tremendous amount of stress, and we're seeing
Mm.
a lot of focus on regionalization or nearshoring or friendshoring. I'm hopeful that we start to focus a little bit more on the long term leadership imperatives, risk tolerance, embedding your supplier strategy inside your sustainability strategy, technology investments that provide real time visibility without increasing your cybersecurity or your risk profile for organizations. As we've seen right now, we're seeing that agility provides you greater visibility much earlier in the process so that you can make the appropriate decisions. Decisions are required much faster today than they ever were. We don't have the luxury of time to say, all right, let's see how this plays out. We're seeing much more deliberate changes in the short term. Today, in a world of export controls, climate volatility, and industrial policy shifts, agility now, it's the competitive advantage. It's no longer a nice to have or a contingency plan. It is part and parcel of every organization's long term sustainability.
Mm. And do you think resilience will be a board level KPI?
It's interesting because resilience tends to take a look at what is our risk profile for the organization in terms of how do we respond to these challenges. My hope is that agility and resilience are now married within the organization's priorities and their strategic initiatives and their metrics right now. It's not one or the other. You need both because you can't predict every disruption that you have. I'm not sure
Mm.
how many AI models would have had the Red Sea attacks and disrupting that logistics through fare. You can't predict everything that could possibly happen for organizations. So that blend of resiliency, that ability to respond to the shocks and the agility to have the flexibility to take advantage of those shocks in the system, I think are now board level issues.
I want to do a quick lightning round now of 3 or 4 questions with, for yourself, one sentence answers. Are you up for that?
Sure.
Okay. So if you had to choose, improve your demand forecasts or invest in running more what if simulations for disruption?
Demand. Definitely. If I can get a handle on demand, I know how to sequence my supply appropriately, even with the variability in demand. If I can get a clear demand signal, it's much easier for me to align my supply side.
Okay. Move production closer to home or keep a globally diversified supplier base?
Nearshoring, friendshoring, regionalization. I think we're seeing almost every aspect of it. And I think it's going to depend on the product or the industry that you're in. There are certain industries that we have determined that are in our national interest and our national security. TSMC, electric vehicle batteries, semiconductors. We believe those are in our national interest. And think we're seeing a compliance and or regulatory policy consistent with those CHIPS Act. We're seeing investment, and so I think there's a short term focus on this, but our focus is much more on the long term impact on regionalization and on the global supply chain. It is under a tremendous amount of stress right now.
Short answer, it depends.
Yeah.
Okay. And build extra inventory or invest in better real-time visibility systems?
Real-time visibility systems. The CFO and me will still push back on the inventory.
Okay. And let AI automatically switch suppliers during a disruption or require human approval every time?
I would say that you should have some element of human touch in the decision criteria as well as in at every aspect of it. We can train these systems, but ultimately it is who's training it and to what parameters are you putting in there. I'd like to see the human touch, the individual still be a critical part of decision criteria.
I had a guest on recently, and his answer to that, well, it wasn't quite that question, but his answer was, if the AI messes up, who do you blame?
Yeah, exactly.
Optimize for lowest total cost or fastest recovery after a shock?
If you optimize for total cost and then identify the alternatives that you have, I think that would probably be a winning formula. But changing your suppliers, changing your strategy, it's going to take a lot to respond to those. Any change in either one of those scenarios.
All right. And deep partnerships with a few key suppliers or flexibility with many interchangeable ones?
Flexibility, especially in today's environment today, what you plan for is going to change. And oftentimes it's better not to pick up the news to see what has changed that day. So it doesn't force you to respond to knee jerk as opposed to long term strategy.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And a left field question for you, Abe. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a champion for agile supply chains, who would it be and why?
One individual, I'm not sure I pick one individual, but I think I pick a supply chain professional. That individual, the competency and the capability to understand the complexity within an organization. Only two functions in the company have to know everything that goes on in their time: the finance, the CFO, and your supply chain professional. They have to know everything that goes on in an organization. I picked the supply chain professional to get things done.
Okay, brilliant. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Abe. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
I think that one of the areas that we focus on as an organization, and credit to our board of directors, is a focus on the consumer. And we did this through a documentary that we just published. It's available on Amazon Prime, a 6-part documentary on supply chain. What it does is it traces in each of the episodes 4 products, all the way from raw materials to use and to end of life in terms of what
Mm.
happens to it. But it's not focused on the supply chain professional, it's focused on the consumer to help them understand the impact that they have on our supply chains. And more importantly, the decisions that each one of us has every day in terms of what we buy. We ask some fundamental questions in the documentary, and we want individuals to ask these same fundamental questions. First, where did this product come from? How was it made? How long did it take to get here? And how did it get here? What happens to it after I'm done? And I think these are critical questions that almost every individual would like to have answers for. And the documentary in the 6 parts provides that insight in terms of the supply chain. I think most individuals understand supply chain in terms of scarcity. Either it's on the shelf or it's not on. What we've attempted to do was provide them some insight in terms of how complex supply chains work, but more importantly, the impact that we have every day on our purchasing, the signals that sends. So if we're buying products that aren't sustainable, that are low cost, and that have environmental impact, companies are going to make products that have low cost environmental impact because they're going to meet demand. If
Yeah.
we demand as consumers sustainable, ethical, resource products, raw materials that aren't scarce, companies will respond appropriately. They respond to the demand signals. And I think this is what we've done, hopefully, with the documentary, was start to show some of the information or some of the impact that consumers have on our supply chains. We don't design supply chains, Tom, in a back room and force it on the industry or on the consumers. Consumers determine what they buy, where they buy it, how much they spend for it. Companies respond to those demand signals. What we wanted to do through the documentary was reflect to them the impact that those decisions made have on supply chains and have on our lives. It is really interesting when you start to break down some of the activities and provide that information to people. More and more, we're seeing a request for transparent supply chain and transparency. This provides some insight in terms of what organizations and what supply chains respond to and how complex they are. This was a journey for us in terms of supply chain, but making it real for everybody.
And what's the documentary called, Abe?
It is called The Chain, and it's available on Amazon Prime. There are 6 episodes that focus on transportation, EV batteries. They focus on food scarcity, on apparel, on healthcare, and on sports. And so these specific programs, each one of them traces 4 products from origin all the way to recycle, reuse, and waste. Our focus is literally on informing individuals on the impact that supply chain has on almost every aspect of our lives.
Fantastic. Great. So we'll finally be able to explain to our loved ones what it is we do every day in supply chain. Great. Abe, that's been really interesting. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things that we discussed on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
You can see at ascm.org or just search The Chain on Amazon Prime and you'll see the documentary there. But again, the best way is to reach us is through ascm.org. Any of my team members will be happy to support or respond to any questions that you may have.
Fantastic. Abe, that's been really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
All the best, Tom. Thanks again.